Now let's talk about what kinds of navigation equipment you can use to identify an intersection. And to do that, let's take a look now at this low altitude chart that covers the Yakima, Washington area. And let's zoom in and take a look at Angu intersection, located right here to the southwest of Yakima. Now let's look our way up from the hard way to identify an intersection to easier ways. So let's assume that you want to identify this intersection and all you have is one VOR receiver. Could you identify this intersection? Well, you could use this cross radial coming up from down here, coming up from Klickitat, Cocoa Head, Crazy Woman. Those are my favorite VOR names. That last one could get me in trouble. But now, you'd really be busy doing that, because what you would be doing is you'd use one VOR receiver and you'd keep switching back and forth. So you'd tune in the airway radio first of all, and then make sure you're on the center line of the airway. Then you'd tune in the VOR station down here and see if you've reached the 330-degree radial. Then you go back and forth and make sure you're still on the airway, then come back and double check to see if you're on the 330 radial. You'd be busy, no question about it, but you could do it with just one receiver. So the minimum equipment that you would have to identify this intersection is one VOR receiver. That's a lot of work. So let's take a look at an easier way to identify Angu intersection. Now notice when you look at Angu intersection, we'll take a good look at it here. There's an odd shape with the number 37 in it. And it has a small hollow-tipped arrowhead coming down from the northeast. Well, if you use a little imagination, it looks like that's a letter D here with the number 37 in it and a little arrow pointing to Angu. That indicates that Angu is 37 DME from Yakima, Vortac. So you can identify Angu by the radial of the airway and the fact that it's 37 DME. So you could use one VOR receiver and a DME receiver, and that would be a lot easier. Now let's talk about another way the FAA makes things easier for you. And to do that, let's take a look at the chart now, and the Enroute chart in the Helena area. And this is Helena, Montana. This is the Helena Vortac. And we'll take a look at Victor 2, which is the 266-degree radial going northwestbound. Let's assume that you're on centerline. Now looking outbound on the airway, you see a little clear triangle right here, which is Richard intersection. But how would you know when you've reached Richard intersection? Well, notice there's a little hollow-tipped arrow pointing from Helena Vortac over here to Richard intersection. Now that enlarged arrow tip on that arrow tells you if you have DME equipment, you can use DME from Helena Vortac in order to identify Richard intersection. Now, I'm sure you've already jumped ahead and figured out how many DME it is, because you can see it's right here shown on the airway section here. It's 20 nautical miles, because distances on IFR charts are always nautical miles. But I can hear you asking. You told me just a little bit ago about a symbol showing the DME of an intersection along an airway with that little D symbol with numbers in it. And you're correct. Earlier we did look at that D symbol with numbers in it to show the DME of an intersection along an airway. But this small hollow-tipped arrow gives you the same information and it's used as an en route distance. So if you look here, you see that you have this en route distance, which is 20. Well, this gives you the same information to identify that intersection. So as you see this hollow-tipped arrow, when you look at the distance here, you know that it's 20 nautical miles from Helena Vortac. But let's look a little to the west at Pixie intersection. Well, here at Pixie intersection, you are given the D symbol with the 32 in it to tell you that Pixie is 32 DME from Helena Vortac. But the problem is that Pixie is not the first intersection out of Helena. The first intersection was 20 miles from Helena, and it's Richard, and and then it's another 12 miles out to Pixie. Well, they don't want you to have to add up those distance readings while you're bouncing around in an airplane, IFR in the clouds. So the FAA adds it up for you and puts it right here on the tail of the DME arrow. It's 32 DME from Helena Vortac to Pixie intersection. Now, if the intersection that you're using DME to identify is not the first intersection then out from the Vortac, the FAA will add the mileage up and put it on the DME arrow so that you don't make a mistake over something important as that when you're flying IFR. Now, suppose that you do not have DME equipment in your airplane. How then would you identify that Pixie intersection? Well, they provided a cross radial coming from the south. If you have a second VOR in your airplane, that would be just as easy as using the DME. And that radial is a 346 radial off of this VOR DME here to the south, the Coppertown VOR DME. So you've got your choice when you're flying along the airway of which way you want to identify Pixie intersection, whether you use DME or whether you use that cross radial from the side. Now, if you do have DME equipment in the airplane, it would be a little more accurate to use DME to identify your position over Pixie than using the cross radial. But either one is acceptable, and either one is no problem depending on what equipment you've got and what you just feel like using. Finally, if you have an IFR certified GPS, things are even easier yet. You can just use the GPS because, as you remember, if you have an IFR GPS, it can always substitute for DME or NDB.